Good evening, everyone. My name is Aayush Ailawadi. It's good to see the crowd slowly picking up. We promise that there is a lot of fun, education, entertainment, and maybe coffee and some sweet treats. So message all your friends, and I see you all trickling in. I'm very glad to see all of you all here at IGDC. Now, if you look around the world today, you'll see that traditional boundaries of storytelling have sort of collapsed. The narrative power used to reside with Bollywood and Hollywood production houses, but that's no longer the case. The world's biggest IP isn't just a film, it's a universe, right? It's a game that becomes a series, a comic book that informs the lore, and a community, very important in 2025, that co-creates the future of characters. This is a seismic shift from passive viewing to active participation. But what does all of this mean for India? We have one of the world's deepest reservoirs of mythology, the fastest growing digital consumer base, and proven technical talent in VFX, AVGC. The question is no longer, can India build a global IP? It's about how and where do we start? And to answer that question, and I'm going to be on stage shortly with two absolute experts, Ashish Kulkarni of FICCI, Munjal Shroff from Graphiti Multimedia. We're also going to have Mike Fisher joining us, but for now, this is going to be the panel, aptly titled Stories Without Boundaries, Crafting Universes Across Games, Film, and Media. Can we have a huge round of applause, please, for our panel? That's when I was hoping that AI would come to the rescue and probably give the introduction from there. But what a pleasure having you guys here at IGDC, and thank you for having me as well. Ashish, Munjal, we were chatting earlier about some of the fascinating things happening in the world of AVGC, some of the work you're doing at FICCI. They don multiple hats, so we're going to keep this as engaging as possible. If there's something you really want to ask, do raise a hand at the end, and we'll hope that the folks at IGDC will be gracious and give us some more time. Munjal, I want to start off by asking you, when we're talking about crafting these narratives across multimedia, across universes, the first question I'm guessing everyone has on their minds is, why hasn't India been able to really lead this revolution, given the rich culture, the mythology, the heritage, and the plethora of talent that we have here in India? I know you've come up with something very successful. Congratulations on your latest production, a Netflix global hit. But we need many more of those to really lead the revolution.
Okay, so that's a loaded question. Thank you so much. Thank you, IGDC, for having us, and congratulations on putting a stellar show in Chennai. So let's have a round of applause for these guys. So, you know, I think I've always believed that as storytellers, I think we do a fabulous job in India as Indian creators. You know, all our movie industry, you know, and now obviously our television industry, and our obviously now our online content creators, like people like you know, do a stellar job. I think where India has lacked is in selling ourselves. I think even today, I feel there's tremendous amount of gap when it comes to distribution and marketing, right? I mean, since we are talking about gaming here, I was reading somewhere GTA 5, I think 120 million spent on production, and I think probably like 150 million spent on marketing.
And it's still not out with GTA 6 especially.
Right. So again, that just proves my point that look at how much money is being spent on promotions, right? And I think that's the lesson that we need to learn. I think that's also the talent gap that exists today in our country, that we have great storytellers, but we don't do a great job of selling ourselves, you know. So I think that distribution, even in today's age of, you know, OTT, and, you know, I would say that the world of a global village, as we call it, I think content discovery, especially for Indian content, you know, I think is still a challenge. So I think that definitely is something that needs to be addressed. And we'll talk about how we are trying to do what we are trying to do.
You know, because we had so many...
Before you go forward, I would like to correct you in one place. Twice you mentioned about Indian mythology. I think, you know, you should stop mentioning the word mythology, because it was deliberately done by Britishers by sending two professors before 1600, before they formed East India Company, to study as to what would destroy many of these very strong cultural ethos and the cultural followings. And they came up with this idea that Greek and Indian, if we call them mythology, and then we teach them English, and over the period of years, they will realize that they are worshipping myth or they are following a myth. And that was a trap that we got into. So it's best called heritage than a mythology.
See,
so
listen,
that's the first thing.
I'm in the business of content, and that's what we wanted to do to get all of you all in the audience. Start off with the headline, so that you all can all start posting it on your social media and across. But thank you. We will call it heritage. Do you guys want me to go back and do the introduction? No, I'm just kidding, but I appreciate that. I appreciate that. No,
and the second thing I want to tell you, see, you know, Indian cinema has been there for 116 years. They have never produced a global property. But animation did in just 20 years' time. So I'm telling you, the AVGC XR is going to create global content from India much faster than you think. So we had a learning curve where we actually built our industry on services. We have learned through the services. We have gone above the value chain. We now into us providing service for pre-production also and design also. So we have learned the value chain. And Munjal very rightly said, what we have not learned is marketing and distribution. And that's what we need to learn in terms of gaming. Even we need to have great publishers supporting Indian.
I'm going to come to that, but tell me something, right? Now, we're going to be addressing some of these problems that the industry has, but we also want solutions. So just to build on what you just said, and we can just dive in whenever you want to. So you're saying the how, the why is because we have lacked in marketing, which the West has figured out, which Japan has figured out, which Korea has figured out, and a bunch of other countries. But given the demographic dividend, given the resource pool that we have, we're still figuring that out. But if you tell me that this is the ultimatum, we will arrive very soon, how soon is soon, one? And two, if we fix this marketing conundrum, can it be sooner with timelines?
So let me tell you, see, the dependency on the distributors at one point in time was the core dependency. And even, you know, as we move forward today, you have the broadcast shifting slowly towards streaming at this point in time. And it's going to catch up more on streaming. So if you really look at who was the gainer when most of this content transition was happening, and this content transition on the platforms when it was happening, YouTube was one of the biggest gainer, and they were reaching the content globally. Now the thing is, you will see some of the Indian content trending on most of these areas, but we don't count that as a success because we don't make enough money from there. But no sooner you go to the box office, or you go to Netflix, or you go to the broadcasting area, then you start counting it as a successful content. But those definitions are going to change very, very soon. And even in the defined world of box office, you will see in the next 7 to 10 years, Indian content trending, because the quality of artists that we have today and the power of storytelling that we have today, they're all amalgamating at this point in time. At one point in time, when we both came into this ecosystem, the government and the ecosystem understood only one thing called films. And they only understood the stars. If there was no star, they didn't know what to do. Even if you make a great Hindi film or a great Tamil film, but if you didn't have a star, it was very difficult to market it because they didn't know, the marketing guys didn't know how to distribute it and market it. Today, you have the OTTs, which actually gives you an exposure. Even if they are not so well-known stars, the storyline is great. It actually resonates with people and it catches up. So things are going to change like this. But we created an ecosystem of AVGC XR today we are a parallel force. And if you ask me, out of the total universe of media and entertainment in this country called India, we started with about 2-3% of the market share between AVGC, XR. Today we are upwards of 40%. And we'll be upwards of 50% in very short time. And that's where we are a parallel force today. And I have no doubt the Indian comics, the Indian art forms reproduced into the contemporary, content formats will shake the world, and we are going to have a new story coming out of India.
Munjal, I want to get your point on that, right? Because it's a very interesting piece on how India has viewed entertainment, hero worship, right? Now storylines are coming up. I think all of us in the audience who have access to different AI tools and content across Instagram and YouTube Shorts and whatnot are being exposed to different ideas and concepts. But if you think about it, the traditional, if you want to really go against the grain, the traditional Bollywood approach, right, and I'm guessing across the country, is to create a YRF spyverse, which is again based on heroes that exist already out there. Right? There's no original comic or manga, anime hero that is being built out of here. Is that something you're actively working on, given that you've arrived on the global stage with Netflix, Deepa and Anoop, and some of the other things that you're working on? How do we get there, and how do we really tell those Indian stories that make us proud, and also make us money?
I think one of the things that, from the time that we've started producing content, I've always believed in the India story, and I believe that that's the unique voice that we have. So most of Graphiti shows, always had an Indian strain, whether it's Deepa and Anoop, whether it's Yom, which is about a boy who has powers from yoga, or, our latest project, which is Bharat Hum, right? I think on Bharat Hum, before even we came out with the show, it was about 4.5 years of deep research. We had a team of about 8 writer researchers who took a deep dive into the 400-year period of Indian history, right? So looking at the Indian freedom struggle, where did it all start? Who was the first hero? And how did it all eventually culminate? So I think if you look at it, if you look at, for example, the Marvel universe or the DC universe, right? These universes are fabricated, right? And you credit to them, and I enjoyed watching all of these, right? But I think if you look at India, I think a lot of that exists, right? A lot of that this country has lived through, right? My own exposure when we started working on Bharatam, I was completely blown away by the heroes that exist in India's freedom struggle. Like Rani Abakka Devi, who fought the Portuguese in 1500s, or Kunwar Singh, who at the age of 80 gave British hell, and there's literally a record by the commanding officer in that region saying, thank God this man is 80. Was he 25, we would have had to quit this country, right? So I'm saying these heroes exist, or there is a tribal hero like Tilka Manjhi, who in Bhagalpur, being a tribal hero, is a simple tribal leader, but he decides to take on the might of the Bhagalpur cantonment, right? These are stories which are heroic in nature, right? And these are the guys who, have lived through our country, right? That's what makes India what we are today. And I think there are enough and more stories like this waiting to be discovered, right? So I think when you talk about inspiration, I think we just have to go a few hundred years back and inspire. I think that's what, as Graphiti today, we are doing that. We are getting inspired by our own stories. But I think when you build universes, I think it's the depth of the universe, right? What is the backstory of every hero, right? And I think you can either create or you can look at history and sort of do a deep dive on history and say, get inspired. I think in many ways, by generation after generation, we keep seeing interpretations of Ramayana and Mahabharata because they are that deep, right? Every new filmmaker would come out with his own interpretation of it, right? So I think it's about when you create a universe, you have to that once a fan comes into that universe, is there enough juice, for him to keep, like someone who's been there even after 3 years or 4 years, right? You still find something new elements to it, right? So I think that's how you create that universe and how deeply and tightly woven it is to, literally reward the fan with these new nuggets of discovery.
Quick show of hands from the audience, because I see everyone very engaged. How many of you guys have watched some form of anime from Japan or consumed that content? How many of you all have watched shows like Squid Game or some top Korean shows, Korean dramas? And how many of you all have watched Indian originals like Mighty Little Bheem, Chota Bheem?
Chota Bheem, yeah.
Okay, there's quite a few. I'm guessing a lot of you all have kids as well. But the point being, there are lessons to be learned if we look a little east rather than the west from Japan and Korea, because they have managed to somehow get those stories out as top cultural exports with a lot of help from the US and other countries in terms of marketing. Is there some sort of collaboration or some sort of understanding that we need to have to really spur Indian cultural exports, right? We didn't manage it to the most, to the most of all of its capacity and potential with Indian food. A lot of chefs tell me when I have them on my shows that we don't wear Indian food, which is incredibly complex and diverse, as we all know in this audience, as a badge of honor, as a badge of pride. Making something in an Italian restaurant, with due respect, is a lot easier and more simple as compared to making Indian food, right?
Yeah.
But we're not wearing it as a badge of pride, as a badge of honor. The marketing is not good enough, like you said. What lessons can we learn to really leap? Because India does one thing right, jugaad and leapfrogging when it comes to innovation. What can we do to leapfrog?
I think, I think three factors. I think when we talk about anime, I think what one has to understand that before anime was discovered by the world, I think anime was hugely successful commercially within Japan. And I think one of the things they do very, very beautifully is they have a system called Linkai, right? Now, what is Linkai? Linkai is basically a consortium of 5 or 6 guys coming together, right? So you have the IP creator, right, which is the guy who comes up with the manga, right? You have then the publisher who publishes the manga, right? Then you have the animation studio who's actually doing the animation production. Then you have the broadcaster, and then you have the advertising agency, okay? And then eventually you also have the gaming, also. Yeah, you have the gaming guys as well, right? So all these guys come together. How it originates is that the manga creator creates the comic, the publisher publishes it. 6 months into the year, you already have, almost 26 mangas out. You get publishing data. Which of these mangas are usually successful, right? They have that data, right? On that data, they know that, okay, out of these 26, these 13 are successful. They've been tested in the market. So I said, okay, now we take these 13 stories and convert them into the animation series, right? So you go out. That's when, an agency like Dentsu would come and say, okay, I think I can go and sell it to my brands and say that, okay, we are launching this, right? The gaming guy comes in and says, yes, all right, I think there is enough of a universe there, right? That we can create games, we can create experiences, So I think that whole consortium of people come together and they were able to find a successful revenue model, right? Which basically ensured that everybody in that ecosystem made money, right? And I think and many times, mind you, these guys operate with a serious amount of code of honor. They don't even have a proper agreement, is what I'm told. Ashish and me and a couple of us had the privilege of going to Japan and studying this because we were invited by the Japanese government. And I think it was an eye-opener for us to understand how these guys work. So the point being that in a similar manner, I think in India, we have the privilege of having an audience of 1.3, 1.4 billion and ticking as we talk, right? I think that fan base needs to be leveraged, right? The other thing that happened is that by the time the American companies discovered anime, there was like tons of content available. So as a marketer, I'm trying to look at it and say, okay, if I spend marketing bucks on this, right? And if I'm successful, I have so much more to sell, right? So that's the other facet here, that today, you need to invest in content, right? And good quality content so that when the world does discover, you have so much more to offer, right? So, so while Japan was sitting pretty with whatever, they didn't honestly need the world because they had a hugely successful model given the limited population. Even if any of you have traveled in Japan, you would see a 60-year-old reading a comic. That doesn't happen in India still, right? Because agar aap cartoon dekh rahe ho, to aap bacche ho. That's still the mentality in India. it's changing now, right? I think the whole generation of the 2000s who grew up watching a lot of Cartoon Network today have become parents, and they look at saying that, yes, I think it's okay for me to go and watch a cartoon film or an animation film with my child. It's cool, right? That perception is changing now, right? So I think two things. One, continue to build an audience in India who is loyal, right? Who believes, and again, in many ways, it's about saying, yes, this is Indian content, we are very proud of it. If you look at anime that was produced maybe 30, 40 years back, it's not great quality, but it had a tremendous amount of fan following, right? So I think that's the other thing that I think as Indians, we sometimes lack pride in what we own and have, right? So I think building that fan base and then building a strong ecosystem within India, because everything else that you sell outside is bonus.
You mentioned code of honor, and as someone who just got back from Japan, a few eyebrows here in the front row, especially the lawyers, saying, what happens to us IP lawyers then if there's a code of honor that all of us creative individuals adhere to? But Mr. Kulkarni, what's fascinating is that this entire protocol and SOP that Munjal so very well articulated is something that you're already following with two very popular comic book series that I know of. Tell us about them, one. And two, do you see that being the final culmination, going from comic book to series to gaming title to this transmedia IP? Is that the way forward?
See, I would say sequence might not be the same.
Yeah.
Because you might pick it up from a toy as well. India, in particular, didn't do too well in licensing merchandising. And that was one of the biggest drawbacks for us because the revenue streams were restricted to broadcasting. That was a limitation in our country. Whereas if you go to Korea, you go to Japan, you go to Europe and North America, the licensing merchandising revenue was far bigger in most of the cases than the broadcasting. And that's where they could leverage their properties. Having said that, when I created Little Krishna, we had an option like what property we should create. And I went to Uncle Pai, who had created Amar Chitrakatha, and asked him which comic book sold the most. And he said 52 lakh copies of Krishna. The second largest was Gandhi with 21 lakh copies. Third largest was Hanuman with 20 lakh copies. So obvious choice, and that's when I partnered with ISKCON because they understand Krishna best. Having said that, we looked at another property which was Shaktiman, and I did produce Shaktiman in animation as well. I was called by the Avengers team that they would like to partner with Shaktiman. Apparently, I didn't have enough rights because it was earlier produced as a television series by Mukesh Khanna. So we couldn't actually do that collaboration ourselves. But having said that, we have enough and great properties that actually can grow from one form to another form, and it can actually become a transmedia property. What we are concentrating right now, as you see the surge of Comic-Cons that have happened, and we have realized that the comic books is having a resurgence at this point in time. And we are focusing on creating Indian art forms and folk forms into the contemporary art so that we actually are able to take this into very unique position of creating these art forms as iconic art forms from India. So much so then we did study as to how did India woke up to the fact that they are great followers of anime or manga, both put together. The largest number of anime fans are in a state called Bihar, and that too Patna as a hub. The second largest is Nagpur. So now we are actually wanting to do and test some of the Indian art forms into these areas. So Munjal created something called as Krishtish Patlipoy to introduce these art forms. I am creating a global art village in Lonavala. So we are now confident that with the ecosystem that we have, we actually can put Indian art forms into animation, visual effects, as well as into comic books and eventually the games would come out of those. So we are now seeing a trend in the Comic-Con that when we take the publishers, many of these lovely art forms are directly going to games, skipping the television show or a feature. Whereas one of the ones that I'm working with, which is created by two guys from Trivandrum, is directly going to a Netflix series, and it's created in 2D, but it doesn't look like it's created in 2D. So what we are doing right now is publishing the comic books first, making sure that we secure all the rights in a proper way, the design rights, the story rights, and everything. And similarly, I'm also creating War Heroes of India with Janal Bakshi, creating Maricom Junior with Maricom, which is with the golden gloves, which are magical gloves. Now, these storylines actually are based on the iconic heroes that we identify with, and then we can actually have standalone stories. Something can go into series, that's something we have to keep it neutral so that it can go through series. At the same time, if you really see, when we signed up with, Rohit Shetty, we created Little Singham that could actually go 700 episodes. But Little Krishna couldn't go more than 13 episodes because we couldn't invent the stories. We could not fictionalize it. So what we need to do is to really see, if you didn't have the comic books so strongly represented, you need to pick it up from what was strongly represented. And those were stories told by the folk, in the folk art forms or design art forms. Or you need to look at cinema has been existing for more than 100 years. So those stories can actually be retold into the next form. And just in the last month, I was talking to Subhash Ghai, and he's announced animation and gaming studio out of Mukta Arts to reproduce most of his film into this format. So when you talk about transmedia, it's going to happen this way. So there's no particular order in which it will happen. It will happen organically as people like it, because you always move with about 5-10 ideas. You never know which idea will get greenlit first, but you need to invest into all the ideas.
Munjal, it's fascinating because the question mark on everyone's minds, I'd imagine, and on social media is things happening before GTA 6, right? In terms of GTA and games like that we've been playing, we were speaking to some developers earlier as well. You said the sequence can be anyhow. It could be a comic book first, it could be a series, it could be a game. But I grew up in a generation where we knew Lara Croft Tomb Raider as a game that we played. The movie was irrelevant to us, and the star that became a superstar who went on to play the protagonist role. When do we get that top gaming title from here, being the origin story of this multiverse universe that we're talking about? And how do we approach that, Munjal? Because you're saying the talent is here, the market is here, but we don't have that AAA top title over here.
I think two things. One is that if you look at Lara Croft also, right, what happened is that hugely successful game, right? So you already have a fan base, right? And now that fan base, when you put out a movie, is definitely going to go and watch that movie. So I think it's about finding that audience. I think today what happens is that as the audience is fractured, right? So what happens is, if you look at consumer behavior, right? You are playing games, you're watching TV, probably not so much, but you're definitely watching content on streaming, you're listening to a podcast, like in India, for example, fun fact, close to 400 million people still listen to radio every single day, right? So I think, like, for example, when we created Bharat and Hum, I knew that, this is a fractured universe of audiences, right? So I said that when I create Bharat and Hum, I don't want to restrict it to just one medium. So when we launched Bharat and Hum, we launched it on two of the largest OTT platforms in the world. We were the first in the world to do a global premiere of Bharat and Hum in 190 countries on Netflix and Amazon both, right? And it was a strategic choice we made that, that we will look at a wider distribution, and not a select distribution. We also went on to Doordarshan, so we had all 28 channels of Doordarshan. So we were on OTT, we were on broadcast. when we launched season 2, of Bharat Hai Hum, at that point of time, we went live on close to 250 radio stations across India, because I said radio is an effective medium, and on podcast. And what we did is we started cross-promoting. So which means on radio, we would do a call to action saying, and again, I think what we did is that on Doordarshan, the show was at 11 a.m. I requested, the radio guys that give me a 10:30 a.m. slot. So from 10:30 to 10:45 is the radio show. At the end of the radio show at 10:45, I said, hey, if you enjoyed listening to this, come and watch it on TV, right? And we would also say that, yes, you can also watch it on streaming. So I think in many ways, the idea is that you are cross-promoting, right? Because you are sort of trying to build audience. And that's what is happening today in the transmedia world, that your audience, which has enjoyed playing the game, is coming to watch the movie and vice versa. I think, so what will happen is that I think it's important to, in many ways, to build perhaps a strong audience on one platform and then see how you can carry them over into other mediums. If you are a fan of a particular title, you would then want to consume it in different forms and formats. So, and even now, for example, with Bharat Hai Hum, for us, the next thing is that we are now also looking at comics, so we're already, so I think when you create, one of the other things is when you start creating something like this, you look at how many mediums you want to be in, right? And then obviously, so we have now started with the series, we've gone to radio and podcast, we're now going to comics and then to games.
I think we need to learn a lot from the country called South Korea. South Korea got its independence on 15th August 1945. Just 2 years before we did. And they obviously did a lot of things right. They had their own television, they had their own cell phones. We are also using their cell phones and television in this country. We are using their cars. There came a situation that they couldn't grow within their country. So they need to grow from multiple parts. And luckily, they chose India to set up their manufacturing and grow from here. But the way they actually looked at marketing their content today, whether it's a rural India or urban India, the Korean drama is quite well known. The people are consuming it. You look at their complete sense of storytelling with the whole emotional drama is fabulous. Their K-pop travels to India at least 2 times. They do a circuit and they officially promote it. They're doing 17, 18 cities right now. And it's fabulous the way they have grown. What we need to realize is how we are different. You look at India was never a console country. Console gaming never did well, not even today. But we do deliver to console gaming content creation as a service. But if you look at India, we have a 600 million smartphone users today. In December 2026, we will be crossing about 1 billion smartphone users just in 2 years' time. And that's a very, very big number. So our market and the parameter of success into our internal market is very different. We are driven more by the mobile phone and the consumption patterns there, and then also the growing smart televisions at home, rather than anything else to judge with. So you will have to see what works here onto this formats as to how things would work into the other formats. There used to be a time when people used to make a cinema in Telugu and Tamil, and there used to be rights for Hindi given to somebody else. Today that is completely gone out of the window. It's like people are making content in one language, it's getting released in 7 to 11 languages at the same time. So what we need to really see is where we are going to really look at the strategy in terms of content. And in that strategy, more and more we think as content creators, the format that Munjal told you, what Japan follows, is a forming of a consortium of the right set of people who can actually make that product successful. May it be from the streaming platform, plus the licensing merchandising, plus the content creator or a comic book creator and the game creators. They will have to actually come together to build the property and take it global. There is no other way of doing it, because if you keep on finding publisher or you keep on finding a distribution, that's not going to really happen. But I see a big promise in esports that is coming up. A lot of Indian kids are doing extremely well with esports. And the next big thing that you're going to see is the success coming into those areas with the players who are playing. And from next year, there's going to be the esports World Cup, where internations competitions are going to happen, and even the Olympics is going to have esports as an official entry. So what we need to do is to see whether we can create a game which can be amongst the 15 games getting selected for esports. And I think that's where the opportunity is to leapfrog from one kind of system to another system.
When you say we, it's kind of interesting because I know both of you all do a lot of work, of course, in the private sector, but also with government bodies and also fantastic consortiums like FICCI and what you're doing with the Industry Association for Creative Technologies?
Yeah, IICT, Indian Institute of Creative Technologies.
I think that is fascinating because somewhere when you're talking about the Japans, the Koreas, and the other countries that have done well, there's also been some sort of acknowledgement or support from the government. From your conversations with the powers that be, and you can both, take your, have a go at taking this answer. How much more support do we need from the government and government bodies and some of these associations to make this happen, to build those bridges, and to ensure that this cross-body IP creation is really happening?
So I think, what's happened is
that has to be a good question because both of you all just jumped at it.
Yeah. No, I think what has happened is that, 20 years of both Ashish and me, and so many of us, lobbying and trying to convince the government that, hey, this is a sector you must invent. I'm saying it's finally come to fruition in many ways. So, right from whether it's the formation of IICT, which is, probably the best today training institution in the country, build on the lines of IITs and IIMs, but going way beyond that, right? Because it's not just an educational institution, it's also going to be a body for policy, it's also going to be a place for research, it's also going to be a place for startup and incubation. So at its very sort of DNA level, it's a very, very unique institution. And it's backed by the government of India, it's backed by industry. So three people, the government of India, government of Maharashtra, FICCI and CII are the stakeholders. They've come together to build this, and the institution has already started. We have 10 acres of land where we are building a beautiful campus, right? The other, I think, factor is that the Prime Minister, himself, when he speaks about, this sector, and he's pushing very hard. Even when he was at Waves, he was very bullish about it. The third thing is that if you see a spin-off from that, we are now seeing Create in India mission. So when we were working on the policy, one of the things that I had proposed is that we need to have the mother brand, which is Create in India. And now out of that, we are now seeing Create in India mission, right? So again, I think a lot of these things, AVGC XR as a term, is something that Ashish came up with, right? So I think a lot of that's coming in now, is we are seeing that. Even Waves, I think if you guys go down, there's a Wave X that is happening, right? Which is the market component. So I think the government has also started realizing that we need to do that. And across India, even if you see, every state in India is now coming out not only with its film policy, but with their own AVGC XR policy. So and he's been tremendously sort of instrumental in getting those going.
I think it doesn't happen on its own, by the way.
Yeah.
You have to go and push for it. So the IICT concept was written by me in 2005. And we had to push it for 20 years with the government to make it happen. Finally, it's happening. The issue is, every state that we go to, we have to first form an association of AVGC XR companies and the stakeholders, and then go to the government and tell them that this is what is going to be the future of jobs in your state, this is where your kids are. And in the last 20 years, we realized even education institutions had to be educated about it. So we had to go and educate them that you need to have creative programs, you cannot only have science and commerce. The creative arts, performing arts, design and sports have to be getting a level playing field with science and commerce. And finally, NEP came in, which gave away And then the school education got moved. We are still struggling with it, but the issue is, in the next few years' time, as it gets implemented, we will have a pathway, like you have an engineering pathway, medical pathway, the chartered accountancy and the law pathway. From 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, you actually start selecting your programs. You're also going to have a filmmaking, design, gaming pathways created with this. At the same time, when you tell the governments that this is what we require in terms of infrastructure, they all wanted to be in films. They didn't want anything else. So to tell them that, boss, you will not be able to do a film, but you will be able to do AVGC XR. And today, after a lot of persuasion, they are convinced. Like a state like Assam, state like Manipur, state like Orissa, of course, they are creating films in some smaller version. But the issue is, today, the AVGC XR industry can be much bigger from those states. It can build and add to the GDP. It can create jobs in those states and deliver from there much faster than they can become a film state by itself. And I think that's where they realize, and then we want them to put money behind creating content. And today we have a situation that we have 11 states having a AVGC XR separate policy. We have a national policy. And we can actually now do inter-country co-production. We have co-production treaty with 17 countries, and we have a co-production fund in India, and we also have fund for creating content within the state, so you can actually create a inter-state co-production as well. So all these things is a building of ecosystem, nothing else.
I think, any industry, if you look at it, like how India became an IT superpower because we saw what the size of the IT industry. But I think, I think what people need to understand, I think that's where it took a lot of time for policymakers to understand that. If you look at the global film industry and if you look at just the global gaming industry, the global gaming industry is much larger. Today, if you look at the AVGC XR sector, India doesn't even have 2% of the stake of the global market. So look at the headroom for growth, right? And I think that's where the growth story is, right? I think it took the policymakers a lot of time to understand this, but I think they get it now, which is why I think everyone's waking up that yes, the next wave for India is going to be in the AVGC XR space.
So the second thing after the film example is even the software example.
Yeah.
We grew up under the edges of IT industry. We were classified under ITES, IT enabled services. And even today, IT industry is mostly about creating services. So we had that hurdle because of this thing. But I think with 2 decades of hard work and total grooming of the creative talent in India, and have delivered, all the global majors with the right kind of content, I have no doubt that we would actually now start creating IPs which are going to travel globally. The only thing is right associations and consortiums have to happen.
I think I think what we missed in the whole India IT boom is that while we helped make the Adobes and the Autodesk and all of that, I think it's taken so many years that now we have something like, for example, like a Zoho, right, which is now sort of rising. So I think in many ways, where we sit today, we've had the privilege to look at what happened with the IT boom, and yes, in many ways, while we did grow, but we missed out on creating a world-class IT-backed IP property today sitting in India. But I think that opportunity exists in the entertainment space, definitely in the AVGC XR space.
So much information out there. I'd need a GPT to summarize all of that. But the one thing that I can breathe a sigh of relief about is that AVGC XR is a term coined by Ashish. So he's not going to bust it. He's not going to change it like mythology. So I'm glad it's a safe term to be using. It's a great term that we're using here at IGDC as well. More importantly, since we have some time, and I cover a lot of AI and tech related stuff, the onslaught of AI in all its forms, and we know it's existed in many forms with heritage and history, not mythology, but also in terms of machine learning algorithms and how LLMs operate now. There's always 2 sides to the coin, right, Munjal, where people talk about it taking away jobs and whatnot. One interesting social media example is the Studio Ghibli trend that became very popular. People were talking about, has anyone considered how the original Studio Ghibli employees and the founders would feel about something like this, right? So just to wrap it all up, when we talk about AI affecting everyone in the AVGC XR space, in the gaming space, should we be looking at it more as a friend or a foe?
Yeah, I think, so just on the Ghibli, right, as if you speak to Mr. Miyazaki, is very clear that this is soulless, right? Look at the era that he was born in and he honed his craft. Obviously, it came from a deeply personal space, right? A lot of trauma that he went through, a lot of trauma that Japan went through, and it sort of came through in his work, in the sensitivity. So therefore, he believes, that the AI-created version of Ghibli art is soulless, right? As a creator, he's entitled to his point of view, and one respects that. But I think there is opportunity in AI and how we use it. I've always believed that I personally don't find anything intelligent in AI as we see it, right? I think it's a very abused term. I think AI has to be looked at, as augmented intelligence at best, right? How it can augment the human capacity, and I think it can, absolutely can. So, it's about how do you choose to use a tech. I think any new tech that comes in, we see it as like a one-pill wonder. That yes, I will give a prompt and I will have the next blockbuster coming out of it. No, it's not going to happen that way, at least not yet. But I think it's about how you choose. I'll tell you how we are using it. Today, in our research, that we are doing in the whole Bharataham universe that we are creating, we are using it for a lot of historical research. So the way we are using it, we are building an expert system on history. We are training it on history books. We are training it on information.
That's fact-checking included?
Fact-checking, right? Because we have collated close to about 200 books, 2,000 books, right? Which is humanly impossible today for my team to go through, right? But that's where I can use the power of AI, right? I can utilize that, train an expert system, on that, and then use that, as a storytelling, basically research base, right? So it's about how you choose. I think in many ways you will start seeing how people are smartly using AI in ways where we can make things faster. Right? So again, I think it's a question of how we choose. I think it's about, like we keep hearing this term, human-centric approach to AI. I strongly believe in that. The other point I want to make here is that eventually you go and walk into and watch a film or a series because you are looking at that person's or that director's take on that story. Right? When you go to a Rajamouli movie, you know what to expect. When you go and see a Christopher Nolan film, you know what to expect. It's his class of cinema, right? And I don't think you will ever want to watch an AI version of that, right? I think as human beings, we experience story and therefore we tell those stories, right? So I'm not sure that the audience here is interested in saying that what did the AI experience emotionally for you to tell that story? So, I don't think that as creators, our jobs are in any way questioned or threatened, right? If you believe in yourself as as a creator that you are, and you are strong on your craft, I don't think we have anything to worry.
Mr. Kulkarni.
I look at it like this, when we were in school, the plastic was invented. And we were taken to Indian Petrochemical Limited in Baroda as a school excursion to learn about plastic. And then we met one scientist there, and he said that we have a miracle right now. We have invented plastic. It's going to change the world, and it's an artificial wood and everything, whatnot. He said, and I still remember because I still have those notes. 40, 50 years later, we feel that plastic was so bloody bad, it ruined the world. So the internet came and the .com came, and then we feel that everything is flowing away with that. Today, a few years later, you might think internet was not such a great idea. AI will die down much faster than that, by the way. Because as Munjal said, many things are true, but AI is going to rewrite itself every single day. It is not a vertical. It's affecting people horizontally. Yeah. It's affecting every single process that we do, and we need to smartly use this as a tool. As long as you use it as a tool, everything is fine. Second is that there is an AI take. So there was a competition that we had, Ramesh Sippy, Subhash Ghai, Yash Chopra. Now we have AI also competing with them. AI also wants to tell a story, take which somebody is prompting somewhere, because they couldn't compete and tell a story like these three guys, they want to tell an AI story. You can look at it that way also. But what's more important than AI for our businesses is emotional intelligence, because the take of a storyteller, as he said, is how emotionally they bind you. And that's more important. The human touch there is going to be extremely important. How much ever times the AI will rewrite itself, it will take from the existing information. So much so, I'll give you an example. When you watch the OTT platforms, how many of you watch OTT today? Almost all of you watch. When a new season comes, tomorrow Maharani season is coming, 7th of November, and Family Man has just come in. When there are 10 episodes or 8 episodes or whatever, you want to watch all of them within 24 hours to 48 hours. Why? Is because the power of emotional intelligence, not the power of artificial intelligence. And I think that's the power of storytelling that you need to really invent. And storytellers have to reinvent their processes and use AI as one of the employees rather than fearing with it and trying to do something which is, many people I've seen, they upload a film and they feel that that's a great film because they have generated it on AI. They have not looked into the grammar of storytelling. They have not looked into the composition. It's not perfect. But just because AI has given them, they are so excited, they want to show the world. That's not going to happen. The good content is still going to be identified, and the emotional content is going to still sell. Emotional intelligence for our storytellers and gamers, game level designers is going to be more important than the AI. AI is given. So that's the take.
I can go on forever and ever, but we have the next session. Our time's already up. It's been a fascinating conversation, education and entertainment, and we can only hope that, judging as a takeaway from this conversation, that when we see a bunch of those Indian names at the end of a Marvel movie, the next time we'll be talking about some of the IPs that you all have created as global bestsellers. What a fascinating conversation. Ashish Kulkarni, Munjal Shroff, and thank you for being a lovely audience. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much.